Okay, yes, I'm not showing any video clips. It's nice to see your faces, so it's great. So the name of our talk is co-location dead? And the answer is yes. Any questions? No.
Cloud took it over.
Well, I think the ideal PowerPoint presentations are just one slide. But seriously, we want to talk tonight about the new reality of remote agility. And I've already, someone's got some sound going on there.
It's maybe me. I'll see. Hold on.
No worries. All right, groovy, thanks. My name is, thank you very much for introducing me, Sasha. Mitch Goldstein. I'm a senior Agile coach. I do program coaching, safe coaching, and technical coaching for the Solutions IQ division of Accenture, the world's second largest consulting company. My nickname is the Agile Alchemist. You can find me wisecracking on LinkedIn all the time. I'm also a member of Agile Rising and a couple other interesting things that I do, but let's, enough about me, or it's me. I have two ways you can always find me on LinkedIn, Mitch Goldstein. Also, Mitch Goldstein, Accenture.com. My private email, which you guys can certainly reach out to me, is zelator@gmail.com. And I have credentials. I was in the middle. I completed my IC Agile certified certification with the cohort. I had started my coactive training, which I really enjoyed, but unfortunately, they had to put a halt to it because you really can't do it in the pandemic world. And this is one of the things that spurred me to create this talk. And just before we get into the talk, I want to give you I want to tell you about the kind of reverse prophecy that this talk was originally given in 2017, before we had any idea that of a global pandemic that would shut down most major businesses in the world. So this is kind of like a reverse retro prophecy where we talk about it in terms of the fact that what I had feared in 2017 actually happened. So with that in mind, let's get right into it. I usually put this slide up. I have a pretty colorful history. I've worked for a lot of huge companies over the years, over 30, next year will be 35 years since I became a software developer at Turner Construction back in the day. I've had something to do with all of these companies and somehow managed to acquire some information that's useful. But let's talk about what we're going to learn today. So we're going to learn some things that we already know we're going to reinforce, such that the values and principles of Agile and Lean and other disciplines, they apply no matter where, no matter how teams are dispersed or distributed. Properly constructed teams can still find value in the values and principles. Thank goodness we have distributed tooling now. If this would have happened 20 years ago, it would have been a big difference, because this enables us to maintain at least a notion of team cohesion and transparencies. We're going to talk a little bit about proxies and how we use the idea of proxies to mitigate the challenges of having teams dispersed in multiple time zones and multiple geographic areas. We'll talk a little bit, I don't have time to get too deep into it, but DevOps or DevXOps, as I like to call it, that type of coordination helps us distribute value around the world, and it helps us run our software creation systems wherever we are. We've learned more about socialization in the last 10 months than I think any of us would ever have dreamed. And we've come to now value our global communities of value as much as our local communities of value. And I said, and this is from 3 years ago, distributed and dispersed teams will be the new normal. And I'm sticking with my prediction from 3 years ago, that the way that we're working now is going to be the preferred way of working going forward. And I don't want to get too sidetracked in the economics of maintaining commercial property and the insurance costs of running a 30-story building, having to hire people to keep it clean and to feed people and clean after them, that all of those expenses are now eliminated by remote working. So we may ask, where on earth is my team? And our goal, hello?
I said on earth.
So what can we do? How can we create a global Gemba? And for those of you who are familiar with the Kanban and other lean disciplines, Gemba is a Japanese word which literally means the real place. And it represents the place where value is actually created in a system. In the original Toyota engineering system, the assembly line was considered the Gemba. The place where the parts were assembled into the whole was considered to be the place where the value was being added. But we're familiar, or at least the way we've been working, certainly for the last 20 years, is with local Gemba, having a place where we congregate in the physical world, where we have a comfortable place where we can collaborate when collaboration is called for, or we can have privacy when we have to deal with private matters. But without this idea of global Gemba, we don't have that feeling that we get when information is shared freely. And we have to figure out a way to stop the geographical or temporal delays, the time zone delays, from causing that start, stop, anti-pattern, and to try and have, despite these challenges, a smooth flow of work through a system. One of the ways we can also do this, one of my favorite untranslatable word from Swedish, I'm sure everybody has their own favorite untranslatable word from Swedish, but mine is fika. And if you've ever been to an IKEA, if you're from America, or IKEA, if you're from anywhere else, if you've ever been there, you will see this word emblazoned on the side of the coffee shop. And fika is a Swedish word. There's no direct translation, but it generally means the feeling that you get when you're in a relaxed environment, having a cup of coffee with your friends. That is fika. That's an actual Swedish word. So my question to everybody who's here is, how do we create global fika? If fika is a feeling of creativity that we get when we're close with people and enjoying things in the same place, how do we create that global feeling? And there are ways we could do it. It's challenging, but we can do it. And fika is the closest thing that we have to what you might call a silver bullet or a magic bullet for increasing socialization and creativity. So you can think of fika as kind of the end state, or the feeling that you get from fika as kind of the end state for how we try to manipulate our teams and processes and prepare them for this new global dispersion. Yeah, this is a picture of my old office. No, not really, but it did look very similar to this. I think I had a little less room. Old school, we had very, very closed cubicle farms. We had limited, sometimes no collaborative space. In my first job at Chemical Bank, or not my first job at a really big company was Chemical Bank. That's what we had. We had cubicle farms. We had little desks, little cabinets, very, very limited collaborative space. We had one meeting room that everyone on the entire floor had to share. And that was really our only way of getting together. In 1986, there was barely an internet, much less instant messaging, much less video conferencing. So we had to be together. We had no choice. Now we have dispersed teams. Almost every team, the latest survey that I saw showed that 85% of people in the modern American workforce are working on a dispersed team of some kind. For example, at Accenture, I can tell you that a lot of the infrastructural people are overseas in South America or Asia, and that we don't even realize that we're working on a dispersed team. But a dispersed team is handling our stock investments, a dispersed team is handling our payroll, a dispersed team is handling our billing and invoicing. Thank goodness we have collaboration and communication tools like Slack or Skype, GoToMeeting. Here we are on Zoom, WebEx. Thank goodness we have these things, or we would literally have no alternative. We would have to really use email. Email was really the fastest way to get information at one point. And we would have to rely on that level of technology, or maybe the instant messaging level of technology was just coming to the forefront in the late 80s. And you have to ask, is physical co-location gone forever? Are companies going to continue, first off, to keep empty buildings open? How long are they going to do that? There are companies that exist whose entire revenue stream is from operating commercial spaces. A company just went out of business here in the Pittsburgh area. That was a company that provided cafeteria services for about 60 of the buildings out here, commercial buildings in the Pittsburgh metro area. That company is now gone because there's no work. Janitorial companies, security companies, transportation companies, all these companies are taking a hit. And it seems likely that because of the cost factor of maintaining a building, physical co-location may become a thing of the past. So how do we manage? How do we get by using distributed tools? Fortunately, we have these distributed tools. So we have things like Agile project management tools, which I think that's kind of an interesting and ironic statement, but we all know what these are. We have Jira and version 1 and other tools that enable us to spread agility of some sort out broadly. We know it's not really what Agile's about, but they're called Agile tools nonetheless, because the idea is that we be Agile and use these tools to help us be Agile. And it allows us to keep our work items transparent and visible, even at scale. And that's super important. Everybody seems to be bitten by the scaling bug. So that's good and bad. We're not going to get into that tonight. Maybe I'll come back some other time and talk about that. One of the things that we're seeing is a very, very fine line between internal corporate media and social media. As a matter of fact, you may work for a company where your internal social media looks exactly like the outside social media world, except maybe the content might be a little different. We have companies like Atlassian who've been working on these fully integrated technical and social stacks. I admire Atlassian because they're really the first company that attempted to create a full end-to-end technical and social stack. Quite an achievement. No endorsement is implied, but it's a great idea. Tools like Confluence and Jira provide us a very easily socializable, very transparent view of the entire DevOps cycle. And it allows us to socialize information about our work very quickly. Are they the best tools in the world? Do they have room for improvement? Yes, they really do have room for improvement, because sometimes the process becomes shaped by the tools, and that's a situation that we don't want to see. However, that being said, we're now in a world where we rely almost completely on our tools to work every day. And I will caution everybody that zealotry about tooling has certainly contributed to more than one failure. And we sometimes see very strong partisanship around tooling. So be very watchful for that inside your corporate culture. The important thing about what I'm trying to drive across here is that we used to focus on centralizing people. And we realized that not being able to centralize people is not nearly as important as not being able to centralize information. And that as long as we can centralize and socialize information, we don't have to worry about the people. The people will follow. And the tools themselves, they really don't matter. The values and principles are the same no matter what tool we employ, whether it be Jira or sticky notes. The values and principles don't change. And I think there's a lot of sound and fury about tools, but I just don't think that they matter. And I think that we will start to see, just like we see in the software world, tools will become more open and more disposable and more reusable, and not be the model of cornering a market. And we have to learn to organize our tools around the work. We have to learn to examine a value stream and try to understand the value stream, and then build tools around the constraints that we find for that value stream. And we almost always have to tweak tools very much to get them to work. There's a heavy, very steep learning curve, very steep configuration cost for these high-powered tools, and it almost never works out of the box. It almost always requires at least some kind of customization. And then for every tool that we bring into the fray, we have to coordinate that maintenance. We have opportunity costs. All these things have to be calculated and accounted for when we talk about tools. And another important thing, and this is kind of may seem tangential, but it's very important. There seems to be a rumor going around that that when we're on an agile team, it means that everybody needs to know what everybody else is doing. And I disagree with that. And I think my disagreement aligns with the principles, because the principles would lead me to believe that we need to have the right people with the right information. Not everybody should know what everyone is doing. We incur a great deal of transportation waste. We could call it transportation waste, of dragging information around to people who don't need it. That's why we say, instead of everyone needs to know what everybody is doing, we say the right people need the right information at the last responsible moment. This is our canonical Scrum Agile team. Canonical is a term that used to be very familiar, a computer science term. It basically means the simplest form of a Scrum Agile team. 5 to 9 pizza-sized team, ideally as cross-functional as possible, co-located in time or space. Back when the Scrum Guide was originally written before the Agile Manifesto, it was never even conceived that we would have distributed teams. So there's almost a premise that teams are co-located in time and space, and also a premise that the people who are co-located are at least similar cultures.
No, chưa có đâu.
Guys, please put yourself on mute if you're not
No
speaking,
worries.
if you don't have questions.
Thanks, Doug. And in our canonical team, we have our team, and then we have 2 servant leaders for that team. We have our product owner and our scrum master. The product owner, of course, represents the customer, is the business value representative and a proxy for the customer. We're going to talk about that term proxy, because it's a very important term and we need to understand that. They're responsible primarily for the team backlog and scope. Scrum Master represents the operations of the team. And there are 4 things that, this is kind of what I say when people ask, what do? They organize, facilitate, deal with impediments, and escalate. That kind of rhymes, so it works out for me. But that's essentially what a Scrum Master does. And when Scrum was originally conceived, it was conceived as something that happened in a localized Gemba, in a place where everybody, ideally, a shared space, where a team would share space. And we would think in terms of team ownership and team space. So how do we get this presumption to work when we have people dispersed all over the world? And I have worked with people, like I just kind of, these arrows are really not arbitrary. They're very purposefully put where they are, because I had worked with a team that had people in Chicago, UK, Brazil, Australia, India, and I don't think it's over Japan, it is over Japan. And we had to figure out a way of putting all these people together and getting to work. How do we do it? We do it by proxy. So I'm going to take a step back, and this may seem a little safey to everybody who's familiar with SAFe, but I think that this structure is one of the things about SAFe that actually works really well. Thinking about teams in this way, it's very, very closely aligned to some other pre-Agile notions of socialization that were developed by Professor Stafford Beer. And maybe someday I'll get to talk about, we'll have another talk and get to talk about Stafford Beer. And his view of non-hierarchical teams is very interesting. But we have 3 forces at work on a team. We have someone who represents the business value and is a proxy for the customer, someone who represents operations, organizing and facilitation, and then someone who represents technology in a shared service to all the teams that are in a team of teams. And why do we use this structure? Because we have to make sure this structure, in order for it to have a team integrity, this structure has to lean on itself. That's why it's represented as a triangle. Triangle is the smallest polygon, and it's very stable. Triangle is extremely stable. Equilateral triangle is the most stable. So we try to show that these interests in the team need to be balanced. But how do we balance them if these people aren't on the same part of the planet? The way we do that is by proxies. And proxies are a slightly degraded form of leadership. And we'll explain it this way, is that proxies are the people who make the just-in-time decisions at the last possible moment that reflect the wishes of the real occupants of those roles. In other words, when I say that a product owner is a proxy for a customer, that means that the product owner is responsible for speaking on behalf of the customer, but they don't decide what the customer wants. They repeat what the customer wants back to the team. Similarly, when I have proxies for roles on my team, it's not their job to interpret how the role should be applied, but it's their job to apply it as if the real occupant of that role were there. And I know it's a tricky thing to do, especially with product. It's very important that we have that chain of custody from proxy back to the actual customers. Let's take a look at how that works. And here we have the typical distributed team where I have, in America, I have my product owner, my scrum master. What I do is over in India, when it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and everybody has had their delicious hot lunch delivered, as they do every day in India, well, it's 2:30 in the morning in the United States and the East Coast. So we can't have any decisions made for another 6 hours. And then that puts India at 7 o'clock p.m. after their workday, at just as the time where Americans are coming to work. The Bangalore is 10.5 hours ahead of Eastern time. But when we have proxies in place, we can keep the value flowing even when we are not in the same time zone on different sides of the planet. And that's because the proxy product owner has to have good communication with the real product owner so that they understand what the customer and what the product owner wants. And the proxy scrum master and the rest of the team take on those roles in a proxy fashion, meaning they make those decisions at the last responsible moment instead of waiting for everyone in America to wake up. And that's the way we keep things moving on a team. It's a very sensible way to try to do it. And I will concede that it does take some prior planning and some training and a mentorship relationship, but it can be made to work where we can keep the value flowing through teams. Frequently, I've seen teams very imbalanced where all of the brain trust is in America and the people offshore do not have any decision-making capability whatsoever. That's an anchor on a team. We can't make that agile. Okay, so we have to work within that framework and keep that balance. Same thing, although not shown here, would go for technical assets and other shared services, such as DevOps people or user experience people. We use these people indiscriminately as we need at the last responsible moment. We have people on both sides of the ocean that can do that. It keeps the value through the system. If I have the other system where I don't have any proxy, and a decision has to be made, that completely constrains value flow until someone in America, wakes up and logs in. So we don't want that to happen. So we have to make sure that if we are going to have offshore assets and a distributed team, that the entire team is empowered to keep itself moving. And we use proxies to do that. Proxy product owners, it's important to remember that the proxy product owner is the proxy for the product owner, not for the customer. And proxy product owner may have customer contact, but their primary contact is going to be with the product owner. So that means that when product owners are working on their backlog, they should be pairing up with the proxies or people who desire to be proxies to make sure that they understand the backlog and enable them to make those distributed, decentralized, on the spot, last responsible moment, just-in-time decisions for scope. But they are responsible as proxies to inform the product owner when any decisions are made. So if decision is made during the time when I'm sleeping, I want to at least make sure when I come in the morning, I hear about it. Generally speaking, we don't give proxy product owners the decision on whether stories are accepted, and we don't usually have them make priority decisions, but that may be the case. And sometimes proxy product owners are used for interim team demos. That's acceptable. Generally speaking, we make the hard decisions on scope. We give that to the product owners and the product management team. Same thing with Scrum Masters. It's nice to have a proxy Scrum Master 10.5 hours ahead or 13 hours ahead, taking place in the synchronized stand-up and then facilitating an unsynchronized stand-up in their locale to make sure everybody is synchronized. Proxy Scrum Masters can help make those just-in-time operational decisions in between stand-ups, and that's so key. We think of a stand-up as a daily planning meeting. Well, if we don't have the entire team at that stand-up, it's very, very hard to make a plan. Plus, when we in America plan with our teams in India, as soon as we finish planning, the teams in India are going to sleep. So we want to try and have, like I said, try and help the remote team communicate, focusing on dependency and risk mitigation. That's what Scrum Masters do. They remove impediments and blocks where possible from their perspective and informs the team and the Scrum Master as situations unfold. So basically, you're responsible for doing the same sorts of things, but as a proxy, you're only acting on behalf of the Scrum Master. You're not the actual Scrum Master. We don't switch out and do shifts, although that would be an interesting topic for another talk. Proxy architects and other shared services. We have to be able to share these globally as well. So we allow shared services sometimes to serve remote team sites directly, and it really depends on where the location of the services are. Sometimes it requires some off hours work. I just did it today, as a matter of fact. I'm planning with a team out on the West Coast, so I had a nice long day today. Sometimes I will have proxy shared services like proxy architects, proxy user experience, proxy quality assurance, proxy DevOps. These shared services can be made available remotely, and it does require additional coordination among teams and subteams. So if we're in the Scaled Agile world, for example, this is why we invite all of our shared services to plan along with our teams so that their time can be planned for and coordinated along with the other teams. Additional benefits of proxies in general is that it allows for local sub-teams to exist. So when we have a distributed team, we spend a lot of effort trying to herd the cats of that team and keep that distributed team together. One of the strategies of this is to make make local sub-teams and allow self-organization and optimization decisions for the whole team's benefit and allow sub-teams to do that. This way, we have to be very, very careful about having an us and them type of anti-pattern, but this can actually work out very effectively. And the reason is because proxies will have a better understanding of the local team, of their talent on the team, what they're capable of doing, of the culture that the team exists, and have better insight and capability of unlocking their intrinsic knowledge value. And we don't have to separate teams. We don't want to do that. In other words, are we better off having the team that has some people here, some people there, some people there, or geographically isolated teams? We don't have separated teams because that then creates islands. When we have the distributed team, it forces us to plan effectively. It forces us to think about how information will move around the team. And it's super important that even though we may have sub-teams, we must never allow an us and them anti-pattern to develop where we start having factionalization within a team. If we see that, that means that we might have to rethink how a team is structured. So how do we substitute face-to-face? The Agile Manifesto calls out personal communication, face-to-face communication, as the most effective way to interact, and psychology, sociology back this up. Face-to-face, we get tremendous amount of information from people's faces Somewhat less so in the Zoom world. Even though we see people's faces, we don't see them in 3 dimensions, and that actually has an enormous effect on our ability to read people. So what do we do when we're in non-overlapping time zones is we actually create a distributed Gemba. And the aphorism here is that co-location is about unity of ideas and alignment of intention and not focused on physical presence. So we say co-location is really more of a mental attitude than it is a physical manifestation. And unfortunately, due to the way things are right now, this is all we have to work with until conditions improve. So how do we get agility distributed? How do we get that feeling of agility to work in a highly distributed team? Well, we have to have our stand-ups, or if you want to call them that, or daily scrums. Scrum teams will generally are intended to be in the same place, but they could be distributed in the same time zone. They could have overlapping time zones, no overlapping time zones, or a mixed. I've worked on a couple of teams, like I showed you, where there weren't 2 people in the same time zone, yet we had to be a global team. So we try to figure out what the best time is to use stand-up. We must remember stand-up should not be a status meeting. It's really a planning meeting. Do we adjust our plan moving forward? What is it that we have to do to achieve our sprint goals? And we establish daily goals if we have to at our stand-ups. And they consist of achievement, they consist rather of achievements and user story delivery, or it could be architecture, or it could be work on defect detection or defect correction, or any technical or operative work. All of these things are described in daily goals. And this is good because it allows teams that don't deliver value, typically as a delivery team does, like an operational team, it allows them to look at their work from a planned, goal-oriented standpoint. Scrum Masters, product owners, and their proxies are the ones who need to ensure that dependencies and solution intent are met, irrespective of the fact that the team is not co-located. Distributed planning, interesting problem. Like I said, today we had our PI planning at my client. Planning is definitely the most face-to-face of all Agile ceremonies. And if we want to have cadence and synchronization, that implies that distributed teams can plan together with local teams, or another way of putting this is that distributed teams can plan a cadenced, synchronized plan, even if they are not time synchronized. And we can do this, and sometimes we have to extend our planning time, just like we did today, to include offshore or schedule planning for overlapping time slots. We have some people that are going to be getting up tomorrow at 4 a.m. to start working on the last day of planning for tomorrow. And team members should never, we were going to say, when we have plans, they should be communicated immediately. And we should never commit to anything on behalf of a team member without them knowing about it. In other words, I should not be finding out that I agreed to do something in my own absence. DevXOps, it helps us do this. It gives us an organizational, a big picture of all of our value streams. And it says across time zones, but I would say agnostic of time zones. When we start to look at DevOps value streams, we realize that they can be really severely hampered by time zone lag, especially if I already have a value stream that does not fit my team location. It means that the team becomes more of a 24-hour affair than a 9-to-5 affair. And the ones that usually feel that pressure are going to be the architecture, infrastructure, DevOps teams. We have to have that continuous integration, continuous testing, continuous deployment. Now we go from a 9-to-5 model to a necessity of a 24/7 model because we have to keep that DevOps up and running all the time so that we can continue to check our code in, so that we continue to continuously test all the things that we need to do. We do this now on a 24-hour operation. There's almost no company that is not on a 24-hour sort of DevOps operational stance at this point. And we can use the tenet model for efficiency. I'm not going to get too into DevOps tonight, but the discipline of DevOps is a similar discipline that we need to apply to all of team operations, as you would expect. We need to think about it in terms of sharing the synchronization of where the value is at any given moment in the system, and try to figure out how to improve it and lean it out. Do this all in a distributed way is very challenging. One thing I did find super effective is cross-cultural celebration. We had at one of my clients where we had about 50% in India, 50% in America. And what we would do is we would share each other's holidays. So we had a huge Diwali celebration here in America, and everybody brought in, it was the rule was you have to bring in, there's another thing that we're never going to be able to do again, but we had basically a potluck where everybody brought in some food that was representative of their culture. And it was really very, very interesting. We all shared, it all felt like we were one big team, and it had a good feeling to it. It also cultivates our interest in others and how other cultures socialize. It's very important to take that into consideration when we decide how to work with a distributed team. And it helps acclimatize people to thinking about other people as real people, because we participate in their culture-specific rites of passage and holidays, etc. One of the important things that I've learned is that even though English is widely spoken, English is spoken by 2 billion people in the world, but they still don't understand each other. And I think that that's an interesting problem. So we focus on making sure that we minimize our linguistic challenges. We have to sometimes learn words in other languages. Sometimes business terminology or operational nomenclature, sometimes personas, kind of an interesting spin on it, or other types of conditional operations, or the Agile, Lean, XP, Save, kind of lingua franca. We have to be conversant in these things across different cultures. It's extremely challenging. One of the things that I like to ensure we do is that team names should also be multilingual and reflect local language, culture, purpose, and personality. So we have a team at my current client called the Sundarbans, and I still don't know what it means, but they think it's a great name, so I'm all for it. So how do we break the ice? Well, one of the things we do is there's a couple of games. I'm not going to recommend any, but there are one of my favorites that we use is we have a Minecraft server, and sometimes it's fun just to jump on there and knock some stuff around and burn some stuff down. There's literally thousands of very interactive, friendly, competitive games. Roblox is another one that we've been using lately. It's just really quick and dirty ways of interacting through a proxy. And it's a great way to break the ice before an intense time. Planning time is always very intense time, especially in a distributed team. Backlog refinement, very intense time, especially for a distributed team. And it's important for us to create a time-boxed agenda for play, so we actually make play part of our work, and it makes our work a great deal more tolerable. Teams that play together well, work together well. And that seems to be a common trait of good teams, that they can both work and play together well. It also helps us humanize the team force because we coalesce around a cross-cultural activity, no matter what that is. Everybody's playing the same game. And we've used this to other techniques to spur global innovation, purpose, and mastery. I wish that the world were a little different and we weren't under the pandemic. We were working on some cool gamifications for some safe activities, but we haven't figured out a way to do this in the distributed world. So maybe one day we'll crack that nut and figure out how to do that. So we've talked about a lot of things. I'm going to reiterate kind of the things we talked about, and then I'll leave it open for discussion. So what do we learn? Most teams are and will remain distributed and dispersed. I qualify that as my personal opinion, but I think it's a pretty good one. And I think it lines up with what we're seeing in reality. But what I want to stress is how important it is that we use Agile lean principles and values and other solid, strong principles and values, XP, it doesn't matter, whatever the particulars are about the discipline, that we remain disciplined, stick to principles and value. Even pure Scrum has a good set of principles and values. And we want to create a global ecosystem, a 24-hour ecosystem of value delivery. We cannot think of value delivery as something that starts at 8:30 and ends at 4:30. Distributed tooling, Agile, quote unquote, Agile tooling, DevOps coordination, they can create barriers, but by and large, they're tools that can be used to break barriers to team alignment. Having the ability to see the work, socialize the work as transparently as possible is important. We use the idea of proxies to help localize just-in-time decisions, and that helps us avoid the dreaded start, stop anti-pattern. We want value to flow through our team and through our value stream. And we want to kind of remove and get rid of all the additional waste that we incur, transportation waste of dragging information around unnecessarily, certainly being one of them. We want to have shared activities that are culture neutral. Try to say that 5 times fast. We also want to build virtual communities around culture to learn about other cultures. So we want to have both a healthy mix of culture neutral and culture specific activities that are shared to help build a virtual community. A team that has a virtual community has shared trust, interests, and goals. And that helps maintain a team's integrity. And obviously, I think we're going to see rapid innovation in tools and strategies to keep up with rapid technological changes and, of course, mutable market conditions. I think 2021 is going to be a very, very interesting year for the consulting industry. We're going to really separate out the strong from the weak next year as we continue in and as we see the pandemic continuing to be a factor. And that is the end of this presentation. So I will unshare my screen and I'm available. We can talk about anything you like. I see there was some questions.
Yep. Let's go and I see a question that came from Ram. Ram, maybe you could read it and talk a little bit about that.
He's on mute.
Yeah, just a thought with respect to considering the smaller Scrum teams or the sprint teams, right? Having two pizza size teams is something that we hear most of the time, like 8 to 9 or 6 to 8 people. In that case, do you think having a proxy Scrum Master or a proxy architect and a combination of 3 proxies across region would create any redundancies? Of course, it depends on the time zone and other things. Right?
Good question. And it's a contextual question, as you did point out. And I don't think in every instance we need to have proxies. We only need to have proxies where we feel, and the reason why we do that is the proxy is used to elevate and neutralize the constraint of last-in-time decision-making across distributed teams. That's really the only purpose. We don't create them because we have a pattern of creation. We create proxies when they're necessary. And we dissolve them when they're no longer necessary. I'm not saying we should build into every team a proxy capability just when we need it. So it's something that I think you could have as a more reactive consequence, where if you realize and you reflect as a team and say, you know something, when so-and-so goes home on Friday evening, everything comes to a halt and we can't get things restarted until Sunday night. Well, then you have no choice. So proxies, we create proxies, not because we necessarily think that distributing teams is a good idea, but we are given the reality of distributed teams. And proxies are really the only sensible, meaningful way to handle these problems of global dispersion. There's no other answer. And it's really kind of an extreme of having offshore assets that are just automatons, okay? And that are just waiting for orders from the team. Well, then they're not fully fledged members of the team. There are a lot of teams that do that, and they're very frequently very sorry that they do, because they can't leverage the knowledge of the offshore assets, only the capabilities and activities. And we want to get those people as engaged as possible to be able to make it so that they can make those decisions when they need to. Even the decision about when a decision ought to be made is a decision. And sometimes those decisions need to be made. And we have to train, we have to teach people to hey, what's up, little man? We have to teach people to not fear making a decision when a quote unquote decision maker isn't available. Now that we are operating teams 24/7, the chance is 66% chance that that person's not going to be around. So it's coping mechanism, not a beneficial team structure.
Yeah, to that point, I think that one of the things I've really noticed in terms of team structure is before you used to have separate teams, like you'd have an offshore team and an onshore team, right?
Right.
You know, in my past experience over the several years, that distinction sort of goes away in the sense that like there may not actually be enough people on the offshore team to be a full team, right? There's maybe 2 or 3 or 4. And I've noticed in the companies I've been working with, or the divisions I've been working with, that people tend to pick up offshore people as singletons a lot more. So I haven't, in my experience, actually seen proxies work out very well at all, because what happens, at least on the ones I was working with, is the proxy is either going to be dedicated full-time to proxying, and that's on both ends of the equation, right? Or they're also going to have separate responsibilities to the team. So for instance, we were doing an AWS migration, and a fair portion of the work was happening in Belgrade, and we were based off of Boston, and then there was another team in Pacific, California. And the guy who was nominated as a proxy on our side to coordinate with the proxy on the Belgrade side wound up having so much overhead in that relationship that he couldn't do his primary responsibility, which was to architect the move, right?
Right.
So you do cut out a fair amount of the start-stop potentially, but at the expense of actually burning a couple of members just sitting around trying to do this coordination task. And what we eventually wound up doing is actually just fully splitting the team because it became too expensive on both sides. And we then started treating that team as an external team, which worked out a bit better.
Sometimes that actually does work better. There's too many variables to really make a definitive statement about are proxies good or bad. And I think you hit on something very interesting, Ben, which is that there is also a cost associated with being or having a proxy, and that we have to bake that cost into our planning. The problems start is if we try to operate a value stream across time zones and we don't have that time baked in. We're going to suffer one way or the other. So proxy is really just a way of focusing and credibilizing someone's decision-making capability on a just-in-time basis. And that doesn't mean that the proxy product owner has to have a deep understanding of every user story or every feature or every piece of value in the system. The purpose of having a proxy product owner is to make a scope call when it needs to be made and there's no one else around to make that scope call. That's what I am referring to, not someone who shadows the product owner all the time and bees the product owner overseas. That is not an effective model. But we're talking about someone who does indeed sacrifice some increment of their time to understudy someone in a servant leadership role.
So would you say it's better to nominate a person on that to do that singular, or would you say is it better to empower the entire team that needs that function to do it themselves? Like if you need something in the PO, make your best guess and then sync back with the PO what, you know, the actual PO, which is what the proxy is supposedly going to be doing anyways.
Right. And I leave that to a team's capability of self-organization and self-management. In other words, the proxy, it's the whole idea of proxy is stolen from a software design pattern, right? There's a software design pattern called a proxy. Okay. I think that probably it might be where it came from. It's a pretty common word, I guess. It means, for example, when we talk about a proxy from a shareholder standpoint, right? If I own shares, I own Accenture shares, probably not a secret. And every year we renominate the board of directors and approve whatever and whatever. And I don't do it myself. There's a proxy that does it for me. But they do it in my interest, not in their own interest, on my behalf, not in their own behalf. But that's not their full-time job. So yeah, there is definitely a cost, and you have to decide on a team-by-team basis whether proxies will work. Sometimes actually falling back to waterfall in some cases has actually improved the situation. In other words, every day the people in Bangalore wake up and they have a pile of stuff that they must get done that day, and that's all there is to it. And their job it's basically day-to-day planning. They just get a pile of work. I don't think that's not going to really spur any kind of innovation if we just, it's robotics. It's you know, it's not the same kind of feeling. It's not global fika. It's the opposite. It's this kind of very sterile and very non-warm, non-human relationship. It's almost like writing a script, right? You're just telling the operating system or the command line what to do. It's a different kind of thing. It's a non-collaborative relationship, and we want to try and avoid that. So that would be the other extreme. The proxy is kind of the other extreme. It's where we invest some time in making sure that people are invested in the work wherever they are. And there is a cost associated with that. And companies need to understand this, and it seems that they're really learning this the hard way. And they think that they can save a little money here and there, and it turns out that it's actually more costly to stay on top of remote work than it is just to have everybody in the same place. Now, everybody's remote work, so it's irrelevant.
I think you just made a very important point. You have to invest into your proxy. It won't happen overnight. And I would probably add one more variable to this equation. It's called trust. For example, as a Scrum Master, I have to trust my proxy to make the right decisions. As a product owner, I have to trust my proxy to make the right decisions.
Right.
I have done this by letting them volunteer and be a proxy on need basis, because if they volunteer, then they don't take it that you have thrust things on them, and that makes life much, much easier.
Yep, excellent point.
Yeah,
we want to have these positive working relationships that are collaborative. We don't want to be, giving orders. It's like the difference between, method acting and, where you actually get into the role and get into your head versus just reading the lines from a play. It's very, very different kind of feeling. And sometimes it can be very, very challenging. Corporations throw us all kinds of boomerangs about where the knowledge workers are. But if you want to get the most out of knowledge workers, if you want to have them contribute maximally, they have to be part of the team. They got to be on the team. They got to feel like they're on a team.
Speaking of that, how would you manage the alignment of the ceremonies, right? Because if you're, I guess I have this hard time envisioning there isn't a team size barrier going on where you have enough people to actually make a ceremony make sense, right? Where some people are actually just going to have to be up at 4 o'clock, which kind of sucks, honestly.
Yeah, I'm afraid they're really, there's there's really two ways you can play it. You can either have synchronized ceremonies or not. If you do have synchronized ceremonies, then yes, someone's going to be waking up early, someone's going to be staying up late. That's just part of the price that we pay for that distribution of those knowledge workers. You know, it's a conscious choice that companies make to engage people all over the world. And they don't see the opportunity cost of doing that and how it impacts the work. Usually they're managing by their budgets and not by their investments. And I really hope that as the world progresses and we learn how to work remotely, that we do start seeing more investment in these and not using people. You know, I just get this feeling that we kind of use people and they're not part of our team. And it's not a good feeling for me. I'm sure it must be an awkward feeling for them too. And that's one of the reasons why we try to have a shared socialization.
Yeah, I'm actually somewhat convinced that even within the same continent or time zone, people's lives are not going to be as structured as they were. I mean, they're clearly not. So this idea that these ceremonies can be synchronized, period, is kind of going away.
It is. And I saw someone ask the question in chat, in the current environment, what does it mean to, quote, go home? And now, for me, going home means leaving my lair in the basement and going up where the other people are. So going home is now go to bed for me, I guess. That's the new go home, is just go upstairs and go to bed and get out of the basement where there are no windows.
Just to chime in, Mitch, you said you don't know what Sundarbans are. Sundarbans is the biggest mangrove forest in the world.
I did not know that. I thought it was a cool name, and I figured eventually I would look it up and it would be something cool.
I know it because I happened to be there because my dad was posted around that place.
Awesome. Yeah, there was actually people, this is just between you guys and me, okay? We're not going to talk about this, but there were some objections to some of the team names. And they just didn't know what it was. They're like, oh, we can't have a team name where everybody doesn't understand what it means. And I said, well, isn't it really the most important that the teams understand what it means and it's meaningful to them? And they're very attached to that name. And I'm very glad, because now I'm glad I know what it means. It's something cool. I assumed it was something cool. I've seen some very, very creative team names in my tenure as a coach. Sometimes we have to be very, very careful and reject some for politically correct reasons. Got to be very careful. Very, very careful indeed.
We had some crucial ones while we were doing some A/B testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tell you what, Mike I can't say. I think it's Michael. Yes, it is Michael. I agree with you. I've never put in as many hours as I have since I've been home. For example, typically I travel as a consultant, and when I do, I travel Sunday nights and I come back Thursday nights. And I thought that was a lot of work, because usually my Fridays are empty and my weekends are usually pretty empty. But now we live in a world where, you know, I am expected sometimes to be up at 4 a.m. to work with people in Krakow and Tel Aviv and all over the world. And it's interesting. In the beginning, it was really interesting because I actually got to go to Israel and Poland right before the pandemic. So I actually went to Krakow and Tel Aviv and taught Safer Teams over there. And that was one of the most exciting weeks of my life. It was literally right before the pandemic, right before they stopped flights and ordered everyone on flights to wear a mask. And that second week that we were there, we were told that we wouldn't be going back to the building, that we can work from our hotel rooms. And then we flew home early on Tuesday morning because the buildings were closed. So it started back then in the second week of March. I've been right here in this chair. Seems I've been in this chair since March. So I do miss being on the road.
I think it's also a little bit of an aspect of the choice of tools we've made. All of the, like Slack, even email, even chat. I mean, Zoom doesn't really suffer from this. They're all based on this sort of like on-demand, ping you now type aspect to it. And they're very, very much focused about driving your attention to their screen, right? Like someone mentions anything, it's like, boom, you've got a notification, which is one of my pet peeves about the transition into sort of like team discussion, is that it's incredibly easy to just to lose 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, break your flow, then have to get back into it. And then people get to expect that, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, that you're going to be there, right? And I'm really unhappy with that state of affairs.
Well, I'm unhappy. I'll be honest with you. I can't argue with you because I'm right there with you. And as a consultant, you know, we get a lot of this. We are expected to be available. Now, that's an interesting choice of words. So does available mean I can't use the bathroom or go upstairs and get a chicken sandwich? I mean, give me a break. You know, I'm around as often as I can be. But it seems when we live by IM, and we're expected to turn around on a moment's notice. When I first started working back in the 80s, if you wanted to get someone's attention, you picked up the phone and tried to call them. If you couldn't call them, too bad, because nobody had voicemail. Too bad. They weren't there. That was it. Rang 10 times. Okay, it's not there, and they're not there. So what was my next choice? I guess I could send them a telegram or a telex. That was still quite common in the 80s to get telex messages, but they were costly. They cost 80 cents a piece to send a telex message back in the day. It was somewhere between 80 cents and $1.20 a message. So when they used to actually send out telexes to the hotels, when we used to book hotels, when I used to travel, I would book the next hotel, send telex from that hotel to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And that was the only thing I had other than calling. So now we have instant message where I have it on my client laptop, I have it on my work laptop, I have it on my personal laptop, I have it on my phone, and I get no peace whatsoever. When is my workday over? Is it over at 5 o'clock? Hell no. Because my clients are on the West Coast. So my 5 o'clock, they're just getting their third cup of coffee and digesting their lunch and getting ready to, you know, to spool up for the afternoon. And I'm like, oh, get me out of here. Yeah, so by the time my 5 o'clock comes, I've already put in a whole day and they put in a half day.
Yeah, this is where I think I have, like, I've been remote for a long time. I was like 8 time zones. This is where I think agile ceremonies and processes kind of sort of break down a little bit. That face-to-face communication really only works if people are amenable to being continually hounded no matter where they are in the world, right? And we've lost a little bit about that think time aspect to it, and that leave me alone for a few minutes so I can actually, you know, get something done aspect to it. And, you know, it's one of my pet peeves.
Well, my pet peeve lately is the sheer volume of meetings that people are in, because now our only interaction is through this thing called a meeting or an event or a ceremony, very much like the one that we're in right now, where we have some sort of purpose, motive, we have some sort of agenda that we try to achieve, and we don't give ourselves any time in between these things to think or breathe or create or innovate. We can't stop. You know, in order for us to keep business moving in the remote world, this is, once again, it's the new reality. The new reality is there's no such thing as 9 to 5. Those days are over. Every time I hear that song, Dolly Parton song, working 9 to 5, I'm like, man, the 80s were great. The 90s were great too, but there's no 9 to 5 anymore. Those days are over. At 9 o'clock, by the time 9 o'clock hits me, I have people over in Bangalore who are getting ready to go home. That's how it is. And I agree with you. It doesn't mean that we stop trying to be agile or that we discard the Scrum ceremonies. What we have to do is we have to continually reinvent it. And that's really what the values and principles teach us. They teach us to use your creativity together to figure out better ways, right? Better ways is not saturating your schedule with meetings. We all know that. It's just a matter of us coming up with the right way to walk away from that. I'll give you an example. Like right now, I'm involved with PI planning, program increment planning in SAFE, which is our long-term planning, and trying to coordinate over 13 and a half time zones. So when you do your stand-up, well, you do it at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, in the middle of the day, someone's going to suffer, all right? Someone's going to have to pay that price. And no matter how you slice it, and this is an absolute truth, no matter how you slice it, you automatically lose a half a day productivity, no matter what you do. Your week is 4.5 days long because you lose that half a day. You lose a half a day on Friday and a half a day on Monday, and there's nothing you can do about it. We're very, very closely tied to a group that works in Israel. Well, in Israel, they have a completely different schedule. They have Friday and Saturday off, not Saturday and Sunday. Well, that makes for some interesting decisions about ceremonies. Can't have them on Friday. So that's 1 out of the 4 days of the week that we can't have the ceremony. And then it goes from there. We don't like to have them on Mondays because Mondays are frequently days where people are not interested in coming to work, much less planning. We also have a lot of holidays on Monday, and it's a disruptive day. So we end up focusing the meat and potatoes of our work week are now Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. If you look at my Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday schedule, I mean, I'm just socked in. I have to schedule in time to eat and, do like biology stuff. All those other biology things. I mean, I have to put that in my schedule, like leave me be, so I can, go hose off every now and then. So yeah, interesting, challenging world we live in, isn't it?
Mitch, you also mentioned these cultural challenges. I just recently discovered a great book. Let me put the link to the chat. It's called the Culture Map, where a university professor developed a certain scale and applied this scale to different aspects of different cultures. For example, one of these aspects was giving feedback. The way how we provide feedback in the United States, in Anglo-Saxonian culture, with sandwich, when every a bad piece of news you have to accompany with a couple of positive pieces of news. On the other hand, like in German or French culture, people go straight to the point. And if you are in a different environment, it could create some big cultural challenges and potential conflicts.
I actually learned the hard way about some of the peculiarities of German work culture, where in some cases they're extremely direct, and in some other cases they're extremely indirect. There's, a matter of fact, a whole culture of indirection about the way German people write recommendations for each other. There's a whole, it's fascinating, Sasha. There's a whole subculture around the language that's used for recommendations. So for example, in German, and I don't remember the German phrases, so please forgive me. But for example, if I would write a recommendation for Sasha and I would say, oh, Sasha is the life of the party. Okay, well, that sounds great, right? But in this context, it means that you're an alcoholic. Okay. So, or you might say that, Sasha is, extremely calm and extremely calm and very patient or whatever. And that means that you come late to meetings, right? There's a whole like coded, it's fascinating. I'll have to dig that up for you, Sasha. I think you get a kick out of it. But there's a whole culture around that. So yeah, in some sense, they're very direct. They just say, okay, here's the news, boom. In other ways, very indirect. So they have their own way of making euphemism, just like we do. As a matter of fact, the sandwich to me is so familiar that I get to the point that where anybody tells me good news, I assume it will be followed by bad news, and then a little more good news at the end.
Yep. Very true.
Still got some time if anybody else. Oh, thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys. More questions to Mitch?
Mitch, could you share your slide deck, please? It was very informative. So
I sent a PDF version to Sasha, and I don't know how these things are distributed, but I am sure Sasha will arrange for the distribution.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm going to put it in a Google Drive, and with your permission, of course, and I will share the link through the message in a Meetup group.
All right, but okay, just remember, if you use any of the slides, you have to send me a check. No, just kidding.
Sure.
This is all
Don't need to
public
use
stuff.
anything because I understand NDAs against everything, but it is worth a read another time if I have to coach somebody. So
Thank you.